Hanukkah from WHYY. It's a Mitzvah. Jewish life in the Delaware Valley is made possible by the Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia.
Immigrant populations who came to the United States expecting to enjoy the American dream usually learn there's a dear price to pay for entry into the mainstream. The story of Jewish life in the Delaware Valley is no different. It's a tale of struggle.
You had people crowded into very small apartments, often without bathroom facilities, and kitchen facilities were very poor. And families came over and lived with extended families.
And a tale of resolve.
We cannot become complacent, and we cannot presume that while things are good now, they're perfect. We have to continually make this society better.
It's a tale of compassion.
We, as American Jews, as Philadelphia Jews, had a second chance. We had an opportunity to help these people who couldn't get their names out. They couldn't get their stories out.
And a tale of achievement.
The Jewish community has enriched the life of the city in ways that often can't be measured, but are very significant. And as long as you have a vibrant Jewish community, I think there's some hope that the city is going to enjoy some of that vibrancy.
In the Yiddish vernacular, the term mitzvah means an act of kindness or the blessing of good fortune. Perhaps it's best to describe today's Jewish experience in the Delaware Valley by simply saying, it's a mitzvah. Hello, I'm Larry King, and welcome to the National Museum of American Jewish History on Independence Mall in Philadelphia. Within these walls are documents and artifacts that detail and preserve the history of Jewish life in our region. In the next hour, WHYY will explore the growth of this vibrant community through the real-life stories and family histories of those who experienced it, and through the sage observations of the scholars who have studied the Jewish experience in the Delaware Valley. This story will show how Jews went from being outsiders who, after generations of hard work and landmark contributions, have taken their place in the vanguard of life in our community. Our story begins 3/4 of a century ago. Philadelphia in the early 1920s, the Roaring '20s. America has won the First World War and not yet been thrown into the Great Depression. Immigrants continue to brave the waters of the Atlantic in search of a piece of the paradise known as the United States. In this wave of immigrants, thousands aboard these ships were Jews from Eastern Europe, most of them from Russia, seeking escape from the hardships and, in many cases, the horrors of their homeland, where crippling unemployment, housing restrictions, and religious persecution had become intolerable. Philadelphia, with its Quaker philosophy and long-standing tradition of tolerance, had a substantial and fairly well-accepted Jewish community already in place, enticing thousands of Jews to settle in the city as their new home.
While for Jews, the impetus that moved them was freedom in the broadest sense and the opportunity to flee persecution, for people of different communities, there were different reasons, but all of them came together with the goal of an opportunity and a freedom to exercise their background, their culture, their religion.
Really, the primary factor is economic. What was happening in Eastern Europe was a population explosion and the inability to absorb all this population explosion. And they increasingly saw the United States as a place where that opportunity would be available.
The Eastern European immigrants overwhelmed the existing Jewish population, many of whom had come from Germany and other parts of Central Europe in the mid-1800s. In just 40 years, from 1880 to 1920,
the number of new immigrants swelled from 20,000 to 250,000 in Philadelphia. 4,000 made their way to Delaware, and 2,000 were living in Camden, New Jersey.
The German Jews, as they're sometimes called, really Central Europeans, they see these newcomers as an embarrassment in many instances and socially separate themselves for a significant period of time. They find themselves, in many ways, hesitant about embracing them as social equals, even though they're personally committed to them.
The other thing that was true in Philadelphia and was true nationwide is seeing these immigrants who came over speaking different languages, and of course were not Western immigrants, sharing that Western heritage. They were Eastern and Southern European, and it created fears, especially among a WASP elite, that the picture of America itself was going to change.
By 1924, bowing to pressure from the Protestant establishment, Congress passed the Immigration Restriction Act, setting up quotas and limiting the flow of newcomers from a torrent to a trickle. Looked down upon by society's mainstream and unschooled in the American way of life, the immigrants had no choice but to create their own communities. In Philadelphia, Jewish settlers had already made their way to neighborhoods like Port Richmond, Northern Liberties, Logan, and Strawberry Mansion. But the greatest number had been drawn to South Philadelphia. At 100,000 strong, it was by far the largest settlement of Jews in the city.
And for Jews, this was the major neighborhood of immigration. This is the Lower East Side of Philadelphia. For all the immigrant groups, the Polish groups, the Ukrainian groups, the Italian groups. Now, the Italian Americans have stayed here, but in 1920, there were more Jewish Americans in South Philadelphia than Italian Americans, more graduates of South Philly High who were Jewish than Italian.
Once people come, they send back information, and that's the magnet. People end up settling in the place where their friends, where their relatives, where the people from their town settled. And they establish their own communities, and those communities go on to do great things. And it's due to that appeal of the American ideal.
As the new immigrants were forced to share the streets of South Philadelphia, each ethnic group carved out its own territory, born out of common background, religion, custom, and the need to support each other. Jews, for the most part, took up residence between 3rd and 8th Streets. 7th Street quickly became a shopping hub.
7th Street itself should be in a history book. You go back to the very early times when they actually had push carts on 7th Street. And they sold bananas, and they sold fruit, and they sold clothing, and they sold yard goods. Everything was on 7th Street. But your happiest part of life, especially when you were first married and you had your small children, every Saturday you'd meet everybody walking through 7th Street. It was a very, very happy neighborhood.
Barred from the more traditional American occupations, Jewish immigrants forged their own industries.
Jews, like other immigrants, tended to gravitate to those places, those occupations, which in effect allowed them to be part of them. Jews, in some cases, changed their names, but in most instances it was fairly easy to identify them because they weren't hiding their identity. And therefore, they gravitated to those trades where they could build their own business from the ground up. The needle trades being one, the smaller manufacturing trades, and retail.
Some Jews from Germany and other parts of Western Europe had arrived earlier with names like Litt and Gimbel and conquered the world of retail in Philadelphia.
Take the example of Nathan Snellenberg, who came over and started as a peddler. And being a peddler is essentially just having a store on your back, and that's how he started. Then he opened up a small shop in the South Street area, 3rd and South, and then moved over to a large store at 12th and Market, which was a huge establishment employing 2,000 people at one time.
The new immigrants also turned in that direction on a smaller scale. 4th Street, known as Fabric Road today, was alive with dozens of new businesses, from paint stores to kosher meat markets to the so-called needle trade.
They had the biggest selection of retail silk and woolen stores in the entire area. The big department stores used to tell their customers who couldn't find what they wanted in the stores, go down to 4th Street. You had all the consumers coming from New Jersey, and either they'd walk or they'd drive up South Street, and when they got to 4th Street was that vibrant a place that they had to come down to check it out.
We had our sewing machines, and we would sew and hopefully sell, and when we sold it, we sewed some more. Then we started not only having stock, but we started going the custom business, and that's how we evolved.
And at the heart of it, the hustle, bustle, and mouth-watering aromas of the neighborhood delis, raucous oases of good food and even better conversation, a staple of Jewish life, a place to gather, to argue, to laugh, to enjoy. The famous 4th Street Deli became a centerpiece in the neighborhood and continues the tradition today.
We were established in 1923. I'm actually the second generation because my father was here for 65 years. It's a real deli. It's not a modern restaurant. It's just a melting pot of humanity. And if somebody at the table is discussing something and somebody else at another table has an opinion, they interject. Well, try that at a different restaurant. See, just interrupt somebody's conversation, and I guess you can get your comments in before they call the police, but this is what a deli is about.
Despite the camaraderie of the local deli, Jews, like other immigrants, struggled with fiery ambition to make it in American society. As the 20s turned to the 30s and the entire nation was suffering from the trauma of the Great Depression, the problem of anti-Semitism intensified. Overcrowding became a euphemism for locking Jewish immigrants out of prestigious jobs and schools, a practice that continued for years.
As a kid growing up, I thought, gee, I want to be an engineer. But getting a scholarship to go to an engineering school was out of the question. I was Jewish. I got a job. I took an examination down the Philadelphia Navy Yard, get a job as an apprentice in the aviation engine department, got a 100 in the civil service exam. I couldn't get a job. Through those years, I felt the full impact of the anti-Semitism that was growing up and was prevalent in those days.
Even my child, when she went to school, to Key School, the middle girl, came home crying to me, and she said, "Mother, am I dirty?" And I said, "Why do you ask that question? You know you're not." Well, she said, "They call me a dirty Jew." I said, "Well, you're not. You're Jewish, but you're not dirty."
Economic hardship combined with bigotry kept the new Jewish community from prospering. But Jewish boys could dream of a life outside of the ghetto through sports, a way to get to college through a scholarship if you were good enough, and the game of basketball, tailor-made for city streets, was the sport of choice at South Philly High.
South Philly, in those early years, was a hub of basketball because it didn't cost you anything to operate. So you needed a ball and a pair of sneakers and a basket hanging up there. Most of us were poor. To get to college, you needed a scholarship. And which way do you go? You played ball, football, baseball, or basketball, or you were an entertainer, or you were a gangster.
Soon after leaving South Philly High in 1918, one of its best players, a rising star named Eddie Gottlieb, convinced the Young Men's Hebrew Association to buy him and his friends some uniforms, and the all-Jewish Sfaz was born.
Now the Sfaz try to pass through the Celtic defense.
Using 4 Hebrew letters that stood for South Philly Hebrew Association, the Sfaz played in a number of semi-pro leagues that were precursors to the NBA, and over the next 22 years, they barnstormed across the country, making it to 18 championship series and losing only 5.
And to make the Spas team, that was every Jewish ball player playing in South Philly, his dream was to get to the Spas like you get to the New York Yankees.
And they rush it up the floor, and the Spas win.
As the Spas hit the heights in the world of basketball, the team played a large social role within the Jewish community as well, giving the young fans a chance to expand their limited horizons and meet Jews from different parts of the city.
We played at the Broadwood Hotel on Broad Street, and it was a ballroom there they used, you know, and it was a great social place on weekends where many marriages took, people got to meet each other and so on. And one of our players, Gil Fitch, had a band. At the end of the game, he'd quickly make us change and get the band out there, and they danced, and everybody was dressed nice. It was a beautiful thing to see, and everybody looked forward to it.
Bonding was an essential survival tool for the Jewish community. Locked out of so much of what mainstream America had to offer, Jews, by necessity, had created their own organizations in education, charitable work, law, newspapers, and publishing, and even social clubs, like the Mercantile Club on North Broad Street and the Philmont Country Club in Huntington Valley, whose first president was department store magnate Ellis Gimbel. These social clubs were hugely popular, seen as an opportunity for both social interaction and advancement. As economic conditions began to improve for the Jewish immigrants of South Philadelphia, some sought greener pastures and headed out to already established Jewish neighborhoods in Logan, Strawberry Mansion, and West Philadelphia. Others decided on the up-and-coming area of Winfield and created an entirely new Jewish neighborhood.
It was a beautiful neighborhood because I guess it had homes affordable of people in all kinds of economic strata. It had row homes. It had twin homes. They're called twin homes today. When I grew up, they were called semi-detached. 2 homes next to each other with a driveway on either side. And it had single homes, but all the homes had grass. They had a front yard. Some of them had backyards. We were lucky enough to have a front yard, a side yard, and a backyard. And it was just a neighborhood where everything you wanted was within walking distance of your house.
Like the much older immigrant shopping hubs of 7th Street in South Philadelphia and Marshall Street near Girard in North Philadelphia, in Winfield, 54th Street, a major thoroughfare, evolved into a first-class Jewish shopping district filled with kosher butchers, bakeries, markets, and a variety of other shops.
If I wanted to go to the movies, I was about a 6-block walk to the Wynn Movie Theater. If I wanted to go bowling, I had the bowling alley right around the corner. You could get anywhere you wanted to get very quickly, so you had the best of all worlds. On Saturdays, on the high holidays, or in the other holidays, you felt it was heaven because everyone was walking to synagogue. Everyone was walking home. You greeted everyone with a good Shabbos. Today you say Shabbat Shalom, or good Yontif on the holiday. You were in the midst of a community that supported one another and lived by the same values. My universe was centered in Winfield, and the center of that universe was Har Zion.
Har Zion, a conservative Jewish temple, was built in 1924 to serve the needs of the incoming Jewish homeowners who wanted a congregation close to their homes.
It was the synagogue of the city, and in Winfield itself, it became the community center as well as a synagogue. A large number of people went to Har Zion for its services, not just religious services, but the gymnasium, its school, who were not members of the congregation.
Har Zion's first leader was Rabbi Simon Greenberg, who set the bar extremely high for his congregation, inspiring men and women to assume roles of leadership, both at Har Zion and in the community.
He was brilliant. He was a motivator. He trained his people to go out into the community. Now, that was very unusual, because most rabbis would like to keep their leadership for themselves. It's important to use them to the advantage of the synagogue. That was no Rabbi Greenberg. He made them extraordinary leaders in the synagogue, and they were powerful men and powerful women. He motivated women as well to become participants. But he also sent them out into the community and into the nation. Many of his students became national leaders and international leaders.
In the decades to follow, both Winfield and Har Zion would undergo change. The civil rights movement would bring an end to segregated housing patterns throughout the entire city, and a new group of upwardly mobile African-American families would make Winfield their home. While some older residents remained in the neighborhood, many young families would move on. Har Zion would also make the suburbs its new home.
I regret that we had to move because I loved the building itself. It functioned exceedingly well and was right in the middle of everything. It was a lovely as well as an effective center for worship and education and social relationships among people.
Before the changes of the 60s and 70s, many of its residents looked forward to summer in Atlantic City, then is now a magnet for thousands of Jewish families. Atlantic City was a welcoming summer haven for the Jewish community, an easy journey by train or car from the city. Jewish entertainers like Eddie Cantor and Jack Benny performed summer after summer. Philadelphia's own Eddie Fisher often entertained at the Seaside Resort, as well as David Brenner, who grew up in West Philadelphia and has continued that tradition of Jewish humor. In Atlantic City, Jews could find hotels, shops, and restaurants that catered to the Jewish clientele, who were often unwelcomed at other establishments.
When we would go down to Atlantic City, we always made it a point to get in front of the Chelsea Hotel because you knew that you were going to see not only friends from your own neighborhood, but you'd meet a lot of people from other neighborhoods as well. And of course, the guys would hang out there, and they would look at the girls, and you would meet new friends, meet old friends. And it was probably the most important hangout down the shore in front of the Chelsea Hotel for the Jewish community.
Atlantic City for us wasn't hotels. Atlantic City were rented homes. But just to be there, just to walk on the boardwalk. And in those days, you didn't walk on the boardwalk in short pants. You walked on the boardwalk dressed up. It was a different life. It was a different world. And it was a place for all of us to feel like we were millionaires.
While Atlantic City was welcoming Jewish vacationers from the streets of South Philly and Winfield, the 1930s saw the first stages of a new, extraordinary Jewish expansion, Northeast Philadelphia. Two visionary Jewish builders, Hyman Corman and Alfred Orleans, realizing the area's potential, had been putting up houses since the early 20s.
In 1907, a 7-mile stretch of what became Roosevelt Boulevard opened, and that did open up that portion of Northeast Philadelphia to the rest of the city. And it was the automobile age was just growing, so that became widely used. And in 1922, the Frankfurt L opened. Well, that was a huge development because it meant that people living in the Northeast can get easily downtown for little cost and quite convenient.
However, at that time, there were no fair housing laws. Neighborhoods were still strictly segregated, and Jews were excluded from the area.
Even though they were Jewish builders, they were not encouraging Jewish buyers. They figured that, that because there was such anti-Semitism in the United States at that time, and it really was virulent, I think, they had to keep the neighborhoods all Protestant with a smattering of Catholics.
But it was the post-World War II building boom that saw the Northeast explode into one of the largest Jewish communities in the city. GIs and their families flocked to the new affordable suburban lifestyle of the Northeast. But as in the past, there was a dividing line that separated Jews from others in that community.
I don't know when it all began, but there became a demarcation line with most of the Roman Catholic families living on the east side of Roosevelt Boulevard and most of the Jewish families on the west side. And this became a pattern that existed for decades. And nobody's quite clear why it happened that way. That division might have been affected by the fact that Corman and Orleans both started building on the west side. Corman did not follow that pattern himself. He lived in Frankfurt, which was still Protestant.
The Jewish influx led to the founding of new synagogues throughout the Northeast, such as Temple Shalom on Roosevelt Boulevard, organized in 1939. Though facing declining membership today, its grandeur once beckoned house-hunting Jewish families throughout the 40s and 50s, 2 decades when the constraints of discrimination and anti-Semitism slowly began to loosen. The onset of World War II clearly marked a turning point for Jewish Americans here and society as a whole. The war brought the nation together as millions of soldiers battled overseas. And with their hatred of the horrors of Nazism and awareness of their full participation in the war effort, Jews were galvanized to take a stronger stand against the anti-Semitism of the 1930s.
There was a sense on the part of some people in the Jewish community during this period that if one was going to be successful, one had to hide their Jewishness either by changing their name, by not being obviously Jewish, by, as they would say, being a Jew at home, but an American on the streets. That clearly was not unique to the Jews. Many ethnic communities felt that, the phenomena of changing your name, the phenomena of being embarrassed by a parent or a grandparent that had a Yiddish or an Italian or a Polish accent.
The Second World War changed a good deal of that, because in the Second World War we find Jews fighting, volunteering, even in numbers that are greater than the American populace as a whole. And when those people came back from the Second World War, the American GIs who were Jewish were proud and understood that they had done everything that was necessary to earn all the rights that had been promised but never truly achieved.
That realization was underscored even further when the unspeakable crimes of the Holocaust were revealed.
It's very clear that the Holocaust represented a clarion call for many people in the American community as a whole to reconsider their prejudices. They could no longer justify anti-Semitism as a sort of internal, acceptable social attitude. It was dangerous. It was destructive. Frankly, it was murderous. It was genocidal. Many people who came back from the war realized that the so-called luxury of bigotry could not simply continue. Many of them were transformed by what they saw. It's very clear that the United States changed its views as a consequence of these horrors.
Over 1 million Jews survived the horrors of the concentration camps, but their situation was still desperate. They had to forage for food and water, and many were forced to live in the liberated concentration camps without decent clothing, sanitation, or heat. American Jews found a new cause in the plight of their European brethren. Thousands of Jews from the Philadelphia area became involved in the struggle for a Jewish state through protest, marches, petitions, and fundraising efforts.
The formation of the State of Israel was pivotal to Jews. This was the ultimate dream, and it was something that was vital and was clearly proven to be necessary because, remember, there was no other place, no place that would actually accept Jews when they needed acceptance, including the United States.
The birth of the State of Israel led to a new sense of obligation in the Jewish community. It inspired organizations like the Allied Jewish Appeal and the Federation of Jewish Charities, which later merged to play an even larger role in efforts to help the less fortunate at home and in Israel, taking on major responsibilities in rescue and resettlement efforts to help the new Jewish state. Philanthropy became a common thread for Jews of all economic positions.
There is the concept of tzedakah. Tzedakah actually doesn't mean, people sometimes interpret it as charity. It really means justice. It comes from the Hebrew word. So the sense of charity, it's also a mitzvah, which is also sometimes misinterpreted. A mitzvah means obligation. And one of the most important obligations in Judaism is the mitzvah of tzedakah, of, again, pursuing justice by helping people in need. And the Federation, in Jewish Federation in Philadelphia, does exactly that.
On the political front, the 1950s brought some reasons for optimism in the Jewish struggle to level society's playing field. Reformer Joseph S. Clark was elected mayor in Philadelphia in 1951, and both he and his successor, Richardson Dilworth, stressed a meritocracy in city politics and appointed Jews to a number of important positions. By the 1960s, Jews had begun to find broader acceptance in a changing society. The children of the post-World War II baby boom were entering college by the 60s, and the cultural revolution that began on those college campuses, coupled with the civil rights movement, added impetus to the notion that the time had come for decisive change.
As early as the 1960, 61, if you were Jewish, you could not get a job among the large law firms. The large corporate structures, including the major banks and other major institutions, didn't hire Jews. Indeed, when I first came into this picture, we began a process of attempting to open up these doors.
The American Jewish Committee's struggle to break down social and professional barriers had started almost a decade earlier. In 1955, John Slauson, then executive vice president of the AJC, issued a report charging that when Jewish immigrants tried to gain entry into the Protestant establishment's executive suites and social clubs, they were barred by the existing power structure. In his groundbreaking report, Social Discrimination, The Last Barrier, Slauson urged a campaign to enlighten these institutions. The AJC commissioned some of the brightest minds in the country to study the issue, and in 1964, renowned sociologist E. Digby Baltzell published his landmark work, The Protestant Establishment, reminding Philadelphia's Protestant elite of the need for social change.
He reminded them of the progressive role they played in American life. He was not comfortable with the early 60s pattern that I've described for you of exclusionary patterns. He referred to this as a caste system. So he tried to remind them that this is your heritage. Don't turn your back on it. Become once again a progressive force in American life.
The American Jewish Committee also took the battle directly to the boardroom after completing its own studies on corporate and institutional anti-Semitism.
We issued a news release indicating that in the large business structures of Philadelphia, Jews were 0.5%. And we expressed our concern at the exclusion. We didn't mention the names of the companies in the news release, just 26 companies, but we wrote a letter to the president of each one of them indicating, here's a copy of the story as it appeared in the Inquirer. You should know that your company was one of those that we looked at in which there was a notorious absence of Jews from management level positions. Mixed response. Some ignored us. Some said, you're off your rocker. And a third group wanted to come to grips with this. First Pennsylvania was one of these companies. The president of that firm, astonishingly, was an Irish Catholic named Kelly. And Kelly wrote back and said, I've been aware of this for some time, and it bothers me. I'm going to appoint one of my high echelon officials to meet with you to discuss the situation. His name is John Bunting.
Bill Kelly assigned me to work with Murray Friedman, that he seemed to be doing things in the right way, and that we should follow in that way. And I certainly agreed and became, I think, very enthusiastic about the project. But we brought a Jewish gentleman into the bank as a vice president in the trust department. We had meetings within the bank. I told them that this was a beginning, that we were doing this with the Jewish community because we felt that they'd been denied long enough and there were a lot of qualified people out there. The program became very successful, and it's easy to see now how it should have been successful, but it was not as easy to convince everyone at that time.
The Jewish community, aware of the business advantages in belonging to the elite private social clubs in the city, began to seek membership in those clubs, like the Union League, which at one time welcomed Jewish members, but later barred them with the rise of the immigrant population.
It's important to know that they're a little more than just clubs. They're places where you discuss business, where you make social contacts, and if you do not have the opportunity to belong to them, you do have a distinct disadvantage. When I was in Governor Scranton's cabinet, and that was around 1963, I got a call from Tom McCabe. Tom McCabe was the CEO of Scott Paper, but he also, I think at the time, was president of the Union League. He said, I want you to join the Union League. And I thought about it. And I went back to Mr. McCabe and I said, I will join if I am not the only Jewish person. And as a matter of fact, I want a black invited too. And I gave him the name of Bill Coleman. He said, those are two reasonable requests. He granted them. They invited 5, 6, or 7 other Jewish people, Morris Wolf, Leon Obermeyer, Frank Neuberger, Frank Binswanger, and it changed the complexion of the Union League.
By the 1970s, thousands of Jewish families in this area had found a level of social and economic comfort within the mainstream. But for many, the plight of their fellow Jews trapped in the Soviet Union became an agonizing situation. These Soviet Jews became known as refuseniks when their requests to leave the country were refused, leading to persecution for their attempts to win that freedom. Philadelphians Connie and Joe Smuckler were at the forefront of the movement to help their fellow Jews. They became involved in 1973 during a trip to Israel and continued their efforts for the next decade, traveling to the Soviet Union to carry information and hope to those still trying to get out. During one trip, Connie Smuckler was detained and interrogated by the KGB just as she was about to board a flight home.
3 men came over, plain clothes, said, "You come with us." They accused me of spying, of espionage for Israel, and my heart was pounding. I was wearing a very thick black down coat that I was scared to death to take off because I just felt like my heart was pounding so hard they'd see it. I heard my plane over my head. They told me, "You're not getting on that plane." I gave very little information. I didn't know who sent me. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know the names of anybody. And somehow they ultimately believed. I don't think they believed me, but they let me go.
One of the families aided by those efforts was the Furmans, who now live in Bala-Cynwyd. Before their release from Leningrad in 1987, they suffered unimaginable terror, culminating in death threats when Marina was expecting their child, threats that miraculously were not carried out.
They said, "Stop, or we're going to kill you in hospital during childbirth." We were no longer only giving up and sacrificing our lives, but there was this child. And, you know, they were very good. They were trained very well, and they knew which button to push. And they said, you know, for sake of what? Of country, of Israel you've never seen, you've never been. It's all dream, what freedom, Zionism, these are abstract things. But you are 26 years old, and you're pregnant with a child, and you're willing to give it all up for sake of something absolutely abstract. And it was tough. It was 6 months of hell every single day. I don't think anybody can go deeper in hell than that. And it was happening in the winter. And the only thing which kept us alive and sane in these days were incredible American Jews, and Jews from Great Britain, and Jews from France. There was this unbelievable movement. Philadelphia was right there, the first community. Nobody sent more people to visit refuseniks than they did.
And we all felt that we, as American Jews, as Philadelphia Jews, had a second chance. We had an opportunity to help these people who couldn't get their names out. They couldn't get their stories out. And our city was incredible. We had more people going to the former Soviet Union on a monthly basis than any other city in the world.
There were about 2.5 million Jews in the Soviet Union at that time, and more than 1.25 million have come out since then. It's one of the greatest exoduses in the history of the world. When you think of it, the exodus from Egypt, the Bible tells us, was some 600,000, and this is 1.2 million.
Everyone in Leningrad, everyone in Moscow knew who smugglers were. And everyone wanted to be on smugglers' list. It's like Schindler's List. You know, you knew if you're on smugglers' list, you're in much better shape than if you're not on smugglers' list. Everything is wonderful, and we have such beautiful families. And it's just happiness. I think, like, if I, stretch my hand, I can touch the happiness here.
Chaim.
To life.
Throughout the 1980s and 90s and into the 21st century, it has become clear that the Jewish community has a strong record of achievement within American culture. As they have achieved success, Jews have shared their good fortune, and their philanthropy is manifested by cultural landmarks such as the Kimmel Center, the Annenberg Center, and the Perlman Building, a new addition to the Philadelphia Art Museum.
Jewish community has enriched the life of the city in ways that often can't be measured, but are very significant. And as long as you have a vibrant Jewish community, I think there's some hope that the city is going to enjoy some of that vibrancy.
In Wilmington, Delaware, the Opera House, which had fallen into decay, has been restored, with the Jewish community a full partner in that effort.
The Opera House was really a glorious place for entertainment until about 1910. Then it became a movie theater, and at first it had all the first-rate movies. But by the 1960s, it had all the fourth-rate movies. And some of the people I know who grew up here in the 40s and 50s talk about not being allowed to come here. It wasn't the best environment. So in December 1971, there was a very large concert to try to see if people would come back to the Opera House and would use it as a performing arts center. And people came, and people were excited about the idea. We started by doing classical music and dance and jazz and country music, and we've added more theater, and we've added more popular people and comedians, and just about anything you can name we do here. We have always had a large number of donors here and audience members who are Jewish, and I think that's fair to say about the symphony and the opera and the art museum and the Delaware Theater Company and all of the arts groups. We have this concept called tikkun olam, which means repairing the world. And you want to leave the world a better place than it was when you came into it. So you don't have to finish everything, but you have to start it. And because of that, we want to become a part of the important things in our community and help make our community a better place.
Judaism teaches that you are not supposed to absent yourself from the community. And my parents taught me that meant the broad community. You did not have the right just to take care of your own needs. And again, and that, as we were saying before, that didn't only mean financially. You know, that meant, you know, working at the polls, that meant coaching Little League, that stacking books for the library book sale. And, you know, I had a very strong sense of an obligation to do that. Not that it was a nice thing to do, but that if you didn't do it, you had a lot of explaining to do.
Many Jews have risen to the challenge of giving back after achieving their own success in American society, and yet issues remain.
I think generally there is still an ongoing disappointment that there is still the level of racism and anti-Semitism and bigotry that exists. It's not a failure, because I think it would be impossible to make those phenomena just go away. But I've been in this field now for 30 years. And I would guess that 30 years ago, I would assume that intergroup relations today would be better than they actually are. Again, anti-Semitism is real. Racism is real.
Preserving Jewish cultural identity remains a challenge in the mainstream of American life. Views on the subject of intermarriage vary widely.
As the years have gone by and we've moved to the period of the 1990s and beyond, there's been a great deal of intermarriage. The Jewish population study of 1990 indicated that about half the marriages now contracted by Jews are to non-Jews. And this creates an issue for some. On the other hand, one of the American Jewish Committee polls recently dealing with the subject of intermarriage produced a high percentage of people who thought it was racist to be opposed to intermarriage.
Certainly people fear the fact that intermarriage rates are going up, that we might be in danger of losing Jewish culture and Jewish identity. I realize that there are reasons for seeing that. But there are also reasons for seeing new expressions of Jewish culture, like everything from Judaic studies in universities to new movements in Judaism. Here in Philadelphia, the Havurah movement, which is small fellowships of Jews who come together for prayer without rabbis, largely by themselves. And that there are many of those today in Philadelphia. To the feminist movement, which is itself reinvigorating Jewish life to a certain extent. So there are signs of real innovation.
Today, there are new pockets of Jewish energy scattered throughout the Delaware Valley. Northeast Philadelphia is home to thousands of newly arrived Russian and Israeli immigrants, along with an increased number of American Jews who were part of a growing return to the Orthodoxy. South Philadelphia is no longer a central hub of Jewish life, but those who have remained continue to celebrate their heritage at places like the Stifel Senior Center.
I have lived in this neighborhood for 84 years. It was goodness around you. It was goodness. You believed in the same thing. You celebrated the same way. You ate the same types of foods. You can discuss the recipes and certain things that Friday night you had to have was your gefilte fish and your soup and your matzo balls.
I get a special feeling every time that I come here. I now come only about once a month, and the connection, it's different from every other experience in my life. There's something about being more fundamentally connected to other people and to place that I don't feel in my own neighborhood.
Elsewhere in South Philly, Needle Row continues to thrive to this day.
The reason the merchants have survived is because they do business today the way they did business 50 years ago and 75 years ago. And that is that when a customer walks through the door, that customer is all important, and you cater to them. If they come in looking for a particular item, these are things that you don't find, you go elsewhere today. You don't get that one-on-one the way you do on 4th Street, and it still remains. It's carried over until today.
For all my 50 years, or however many years of my 50 years that I have a memory, I remember this street. I remember the people. I remember their faces. I mean, I can't get those faces out of my head, and as a result of that, I feel that a lot of businesses survived here because they just couldn't have it any other way. It was in their hearts to stay here.
In the surrounding suburbs and towns, there are thriving Jewish communities in places like Huntington Valley, Bala Cynwyd, Yardley, Newark, Delaware, and Cherry Hill, New Jersey. In that community at Temple Emmanuel, both young and old are reconnecting with their Jewish roots, a widespread trend that is leading to growth in many congregations.
The return to tradition really applies to all peoples, to all religions. And turning inward, with the Lech Lecha, turning inward, instead of going out, of always, what's out there, the grass is greener, on the other side. Instead of always looking ahead, it's starting to look inward to oneself, to one's religion, to one's culture. And that path has worked for generations in the past, and it seems to be providing a lot of comfort and solace and strength for us in this day and age.
Is everybody ready to start our Shabbat? Our Tag Shabbat?
For example, in our Tat Shabbat, it's going to be basically all in Hebrew. All the songs are Hebrew songs. There will be a study session as well. There's a very devoted group of students who gather every Saturday morning and look at the portion of the week and try to see how the words, these ancient words, speak to them. So it says, God said to Avram, Lech Lecha. The words Lech Lecha can be translated in so many different ways.
Praise yourselves to your God.
For the main service, we're going to enjoy a service which is a combination of Hebrew and English, but mostly in Hebrew.
Vayehi ra'av ba'aretz, vayeren Avraham Mitzrayim legasham, ki kaved hara ba'aretz.
And I think because of the greatness of this country, because of greater understanding between peoples and appreciation of differences, we are able to recapture those things that are important to us and not worry that it might harm us, the fact that we carry out these rituals, traditions, customs.
I am related to every Jew who existed before me, and I am related to every Jew who will come after me. I am part of a history. I'm part of a chain, an invisible chain, but a chain that is as vivid as any chain that exists. And it's a chain of Jewish history. I'm part of it, and that gives me great comfort.
I am the inheritor of a wonderful heritage, of a wonderful religious tradition. Not necessarily better than others, but a wonderful one. And I have an obligation to make sure that the world benefits from that tradition.
Being a Jew is more than a religious connection. It's, for me, a political state of mind and social justice state of mind, and also an academic, intellectual, and cultural state of mind.
I live my life as a Jew. I believe the precepts that I understand that Judaism teaches me helps me be a better human being, hopefully helps me be a better son, and a better husband, and a better father, and a better Zayda.
For us, being a Jew is a blessing because we are part of the unbelievable story. And being a Jew means to be a player in the story and in the history. And I think that being a Jew, it means being not someone who is watching events on History Channel, but rather making the events happen.
And so, for many Jews in the Delaware Valley, with pride in their achievements and gratitude for the blessings they've received, life here truly is a mitzvah.
Stay tuned to learn how you can own your own copy of It's a Mitzvah, Jewish Life in the Delaware Valley, and support WHYY at the same time. And watch for an encore showing of It's a Mitzvah next Monday night at 9 o'clock. Right now, stay tuned for Avi Hoffman's Too Jewish, all coming up here on WHYY.
It's a Mitzvah, Jewish Life in the Delaware Valley, was made possible by the Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia, and made possible by the following.
Ben Cunningham of WHYY, and I must tell you,
Hello, I'm Ed Cunningham of WHYY, and I must tell you, I learned so much about the Jewish community in the Delaware Valley by producing this program. It's a mitzvah, and what a learning experience it has been. I've learned about all of the terrible things that the Jewish people had to endure to become full-fledged members of our community and our society, how it was all so terribly unfair. And I've also learned that thanks to that new acculturation, that acceptance, I've learned how much this community has benefited. Well, anyway, it's been a great experience. I hope you've enjoyed our show. Perhaps you've learned a few things too. Perhaps if you lived through them, you've kind of experienced them again. We are very proud to have this for you on this premiere night. Very proud to offer it to you, for you to own, to help us bring you more stories of life in the Delaware Valley. It's a mitzvah, Jewish Life in the Delaware Valley, yours for a pledge of $72 at 1-888-345-9499. And yes, if you say, that looks a little odd, that doesn't look like the show, well, you're right. I have to admit, it's a mock-up. This show is just right, brand new off the presses. We've just finished it, so we haven't had a chance to get it duplicated and put it in home video yet, but it's going to happen soon. You're going to get one for your pledge of $72 at 1-888-345-9499. And if you notice the tie that I'm wearing, well, let me tell you something. It's a very special tie. This is not a tie you're going to find in any store, Nicole Miller or otherwise. This is a tie that has been designed just to celebrate this show here at WHYY by Nicole Miller, and it has many of our Jewish landmarks of the Delaware Valley imprinted on that tie. There is also a scarf version of that, which we're going to show you in a moment. You can have either the scarf or the tie that I'm wearing, designed specifically for us by Nicole Miller, and a copy of the show for a pledge of $252 at 1-888-345-9499. So as you see on the screen, it's $72 just for the video, $252 for the scarf or the tie and the video at 1-888-345-9499. We hope that by watching the show, you'll encourage us to bring you even more stories of life in the Delaware Valley. You do that every time you make a pledge at that toll-free number. Here's my colleague, Suzanne Nance.
Thank you, Ed. And here is the scarf that Nicole Miller designed for us here at WHYY so that we can share this with you. For your pledge this evening of $252, you can own your very own Nicole Miller It's a Mitzvah scarf. And with that pledge of $252, you will get a scarf, you will get the video of It's a Mitzvah for your own pleasure. And you can enjoy that over and over again. You can share it with friends and family. And your support to WHYY makes these productions happen. And that's why it's very important for you to make that call right now. 1-888-345-9499, or you could go online at WHYY.org. We do have a web component to It's a Mitzvah, so when you are online making your pledge, you can visit that site on WHYY.org and learn more about the production. You make this happen. Only at WHYY could we put together a program such as It's a Mitzvah, bringing you historical photos and rare footage and the interviews that you've seen tonight, discussing the cultural and economic struggles and triumphs of the Jewish people in the Delaware Valley. Please make that call, 1-888-345-9499. Let's go back to Ed Cunningham.
Well, I'll tell you, Suzanne, this is one very smart-looking tie. I've got smart-looking scarf that you've got, all with the same themes involved, designed exclusively for us by Nicole Miller. You can't find the tie or the scarf in any store, Nicole Miller or otherwise. You can get it only here, limited number that have been designed by Nicole Miller. There you see the Frank Lloyd Wright Synagogue, Beth Shalom, of course. There is also Albert M. Greenfield, who ran the Bellevue Stratford Hotel, the Israeli flag on there. A little bit of the old and the new as well. For instance, right here, right where my microphone is, I'm pointing to that little effigy of the Kamak Baths, which is one of the earliest institutions in the Jewish community, about 100 years ago on the east side of Philadelphia. And also the new as well, as I look down further, just above the Kamak Baths, there's a representation of the Kimmel Center for the Performing Arts, which, of course, WHYY was there to help open, given to the city of Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Orchestra and many other organizations by Sidney Kimmel, one of our great Jewish philanthropists. One of the great things we learned on the show, that once this Jewish community got its rightful acceptance in the Delaware Valley, the scope of its generosity to our community was unbounded. Just take a look around you at all the wonderful institutions we've got here. So many of them have names on there from the Jewish community that have been given to this community. It's all what we learned by watching It's a Mitzvah, Jewish Life in the Delaware Valley. You can have the show, too, don't forget, for that pledge of $72 at 1-888-345-9499. Suzanne.
Ed, that tie looks great on you. And you can own one yourself if you would like to make a pledge tonight to WHYY to support programs such as It's a Mitzvah. 1-888-345-9499 for a pledge of $252. You can either choose a Nicole Miller scarf or a Nicole Miller tie, and you get that with the video of the program. And of course, you support WHYY, and that comes with all the membership benefits that we are able to include for your donation and for your support of WHYY. 1-888-345-9499. $252. That's in multiples of 18. And as you know, special gifts are often given in high, and that's what we're doing here today. $252, your pledge of support, 1-888-345-9499. Let's go back to Ed.
You know, Suzanne, many times people will talk about life in America and say we're so lucky to live in this free country. It almost becomes a cliche. But in talking to Marina Furman and her husband Lev in this program for our interview, they told us that when they recounted the story of the terrors that they went through in the old Soviet Union, they said to us, "You're so lucky to be living in this country." And it had so much extra meaning for me just from having conducted that interview with Lev and Marina Furman. All on here, Jewish Life in the Delaware Valley. It's a Mitzvah for a pledge of $72. Our thanks to you for making that pledge.
Happy Hanukkah from WHYY.
Hi, I'm David Rubinson, the Director of Broadcasting here at WHYY, and we hope you enjoyed It's a Mitzvah, celebrating Jewish life in the Delaware Valley, and we would like to now turn the tables just a little bit and celebrate the humor of the Jewish people. And